There are a lot of times the word family is applied to a group of things, but in the case of the de Havilland Moths, they really are a family of aircraft. Very much connected, and they were groundbreaking. The Moths are in many ways remembered for their amazing role as training aircraft, but their genesis was in the idea that if flying could be made cheap enough that there would be a strong market to tap into. This has been attempted a couple of times before. There were competitions to try and get a company to produce an aircraft cheap enough for the masses. De Havilland was not happy with the stated requirements. The DH-60 was the first Moth. It had a 4-cylinder 60 horsepower engine. It was a simple aircraft, but with that came an overall strength of design. It wasn't uncomfortable on longer flights and was well suited to being used for training. The first flight was in 1925. These aircraft were groundbreaking. They received governmental support in the form of 5 subsidised flying clubs. Most of the aircraft being made in 1925 were for these flying clubs, and only a handful of aircraft did go to private owners. Australia was an early adopter, and they received 9 of the 14 aircraft that were exported in 1926. The Moths were to receive an upgrade in a new engine. The new engine would produce 85 horsepower, and the aircraft was chosen for some long-range flights. One being by Neville Stack, who flew a Moth from Croydon to India. Production was also being upgraded. 1925 saw 20 Moths made, and 1926 saw 35, but by 1927 there would be 150 constructed. This in part was driven by de Havilland, who set up an assembly plant in Australia, an interest being fueled by popular pilots like Lady Bailey, who was a competent aviator and set an altitude record flying a Moth at more than 17,000 feet. There were also some long-distance flights between South Africa and England. The Moth would receive another upgrade in 1928, with the engine now producing 90 horsepower. However, these engines had been using Renault parts that were surplus after the First World War, but the lowering of demand due to the war's end and the parts were now running out. The decision was made that a new engine was required. There was also changes to the landing gear, and this Moth was known as the DH-60X. The new engine was the Gypsy and led to the famous Gypsy Moth. The aircraft was extremely reliable. Several endurance tests were completed. One with extra fuel tanks allowed the aircraft to stay aloft for 24 hours, and another did 600 flight hours in around 9 months, and its service part requirements only came to £10. The Moth flying clubs were strong and could be found in the UK, Australia, Canada, Colombia, Finland, India, Africa, New Zealand, Asia, South America, Spain, and Europe. As a commercial aircraft, it flew in more than 20 countries. By 1934, more than 650 were built. Amy Johnson flew one from Croydon to Australia in 1930. This made her the first to solo from England to Australia in the women's records. There would be a strengthened version for the more remote operator where repairs would be more difficult. The DH-60G3 came out in 1931, which would see a rise in horsepower to 133. It received worldwide orders. The Moths were an amazing aircraft, but planning and respect was still required. The 72-year-old Duchess of Bedford took her Moth for a flight over the North Sea and was never seen again. The DH-60T was proven to be a decent trainer. The 61 was a beast of a plane in comparison and was called the Giant Moth. It could hold 6 to 8 passengers and was an early airliner. The DH-75 Hawk Moth was a little smaller and came with a 4-seat cabin. This came with a newer engine. The Ghost came with 198 horsepower, but Hawk Moths also came with Armstrong Siddeley Lynx radials, which had 240 horsepower. The DH-80 Puss Moth was a high-wing monoplane with an enclosed cabin to seat 3. Around 350 were built, and it was a popular design, with around half being export sales. The 81 Swallow Moth was a 2-seat low-wing monoplane and was a commercial failure. It was developed during the Great Depression, and this made it very difficult to generate sales, especially in the export market. The Moth line was successful, but its true fame came from the DH-82 Tiger. The 60s had served the RAF well as a trainer, but as technology improved, the RAF started to feel they needed something newer. By its official retirement near 1960, almost 9,000 of the aircraft had been built. They were reliable and an extremely solid aircraft. The fact so many were flying years after its official retirement is testament to the quality of the design. As a trainer, it was exceptional. It came with a hood cover to block visibility for instrument flying. The Tigermoth has become a legendary aircraft, and there are still societies dedicated to them. The Tigermoth would be replaced by another de Havilland design, but not a Moth, the excellent Chipmunk. I admit that I'm a bit of a fan of Airfix. Now I do wish that they would have a better fit than they sometimes do, even their new tooled ones. It's 2021 and things should be better. They are not bad at all, just that they could sometimes be a little better still. But they will always win points from me in two main areas. 1. They offer gear up options for many of their aircraft, and while many modelers choose to not do that, the fact that they give the option for those that do is a pretty neat thing. 2. They usually have a crew, which is a really nice option, especially with the gear up option. I found the Revell 109G6 in 132 had a gear up option, but no pilot. Revell, you're halfway there. Airfix also often chooses some of their lineup to be not quite as popular as one might expect. And I love that about them. Spitfires are my favourite plane, but even I don't get super excited about new Spitfire releases. So often when new releases are coming, they are Spits, 109s or P51s. Airfix has those in its lineup, but they also do some that are a surprise. The fact that there is a 72 and 48 for the Tigermoth was a bit of a surprise. It is a totally iconic aircraft, but it lacks the sexiness of a Spitfire or the excitement that the P51 seems to bring. The 48 kit is not very involved, and part of that I think comes from the fact that the actual aircraft is not very involved. It was a simple but great piece of engineering which translates well into the kit form. The kit builds very well and the cockpit is decently detailed and goes together without any major problems, and it fits within the fuselage, which is always nice. There are kits that as soon as you try to test fit the halves you find the cockpit is way too big. The detail overall is functional everywhere else. This isn't a fault of the kit, it's a simple plane that lacks complex panel lines and excessive surface detail. The build itself is not really that difficult and the struts do a decent job of holding everything in place. Something that should be appreciated on a biplane. On real planes they can have piston, steel or wood. Kits instead have a small piece of plastic expected to hold up the wings or be part of the landing gear. So when it works right, I'm always happy. This is not a very expensive kit either, which makes it perfect for a weekend build. If 48 is your preferred scale and you're coming off a complex build, then this little piece of aviation history could well be what you're looking for.